if employees contribute to the input for the biosecurity measures, well, then they get some ownership out of that. You can one big thing that psychologists are telling us that we fail to do that in swine and poultry is to measure individual employee performance and compare them. And they're saying, look, a lot of companies that need employees to really do things systematically the same way, they pay a lot of attention to that. And they find ways to have, and to be capable to determine how an individual performs. And they provide a comparison for that individual to the other employees.
Hi everyone, Miranda Smith here with the Swine at Canada podcast show brought to you by Wisenetics. So we bring the brightest minds together to talk about the latest insights and discussions in the Canadian pork industry. And one of those bright minds is Dr. Jean-Pierre Vaillancourt, who is a professor of veterinary medicine at the University of Montreal. So welcome to the show, Jean-Pierre.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I should say welcome back because we have had you on the show before, but that's a while ago. So we'll be talking about biosecurity compliance today and specifically focus on the human component. Before we do that, can you first give us a short introduction into your background?
Well, I'm a veterinarian. I've got a master's degree in clinical sciences. I worked on porcine pleural pneumonia for my master's degree, and my PhD was on pre-weaning mortality in pigs from the University of Minnesota with people who unfortunately have passed away. Al Lehman, Bob Morrison, Carlos Pijuan, well-known people in North America. And I've been working mainly on biosecurity, infectious disease control. But I've done some in swine, but I've been more on the poultry side because when I started my career after my PhD, I could either do a postdoc in pigs or a regular faculty position at the Ontario Veterinary College in poultry. And my family background is in poultry, so that's how I switched. But I'm always coming back to swine because of biosecurity.
Mm-hmm. And I guess biosecurity is important in both industries. So,
well, in both industries, we've had emerging or re-emerging infectious diseases. Way back a few decades ago, when I left the swine world to go to the poultry world, we were talking about mystery disease, right? And that turned out to be PRRS. Now the big concern is African swine fever, with wild hogs migrating north from the United States, millions of them. They don't have it yet, but when you look at what's happening elsewhere in the world, then we realize that we have some major infectious diseases to have to worry about, and we need to find ways to minimize risk, really.
Most companies know AI can help, but the hard part is getting it deployed inside the business. Elevate Agents builds and launches custom AI agents that handle repetitive workflows, reduce manual overhead, and help teams move faster without adding headcount. From identifying the right use cases to deploying agents that actually work in your operations, Elevate turns AI from an idea into execution. Build smarter systems with Elevate Agents. Visit elevateagents.ai.
mm-hmm. And so can you talk a little bit about some things that you can do to minimize that risk?
Well, when it comes to biosecurity, people on the pig side, they know a lot because of PRRS and because of circovirus, all sorts of other pathogens that that people on the swine side have been dealing with for decades now. So I'm sure that a lot of listeners will think, well, heck, that's not new, and we're mastering that. We're pretty good at it. I would like to stress a couple of things. First of all, don't assume too much. Unless you can be there constantly checking on people, you really have no idea how much complaints you get regarding the biosecurity measures. Because the biosecurity measures, the principles of it, and last time we talked, I mentioned that they go back to over 2,000 years ago, right? It's reducing sources of contamination and bringing a distance between these sources and the animals we're trying to protect. So, in the swine industry in Canada, United States, we've put together, empty rooms, sometimes shower in, shower out. We have like Danish entrance system. We tried, some will have air filtration in some places. There's a lot of stuff that's in place, but a lot of it depends on the willingness of people to repeatedly do the right thing. And that's not always happening. And when we look at it, when we use cameras to check on this, that's when we realize that even on farms that we feel they should be doing very well, it's not always the case.
But would you say people are just not interested in following the rules, or is it deeper than that?
I think they're tired. I think they're not convinced that it works. Because if you're putting in place a biosecurity plan and the farm gets infected anyway, very often we will assume, well, we had a plan and it didn't work. Very few people will say, well, wait a minute, is it because we did not apply the plan correctly? Okay, we just go with we assume a lot, and that's the problem. And when you do that, then you get discouraged and you say, look, we can put in place all these biosecurity measures. The virus comes through the air. With PRRS, you do have a point to a certain extent, right? But there's a lot of pathogens where that's not the case at all. You need to drag it in. One big example is African swine fever. That thing does not just fly around. You have to drag that virus in. And the good news for the virus is that it's so resistant in the environment, the virus can get someplace and wait for weeks and months to be picked up, by someone who will not change boots, who will not wash hands after touching something that was contaminated. So, to always, day in, day out, do the right thing is very demanding. And people are just, I think, they heard about biosecurity so much, they're sick and tired of it. And I understand that, but that still does not solve the issue.
But do you think there's also maybe a part where the rules just haven't been explained properly on why they are in place? Because I even find that in myself, like that I've made some mistakes because I didn't realize where the certain lines were and where I had to change booties and right. So is that part of it?
It's a huge part of it. I've seen that in the United States when I was in North Carolina, where employees would be told what to do, but they were not explained. Nobody explained to them why that was being done. And a lot of these people, sometimes they come from another country, like Mexicans in the United States. We have a lot of people in Quebec from Guatemala, for example, Colombia. And these people are certainly not stupid. But when you ask them about what's your understanding of infectious diseases, why we need to wash our hands or do this or do that, then you realize they don't have the knowledge. And if if you don't explain to them why something is very important, then they just don't pay attention to it. So that is certainly one big issue. And since you have a turnover very often you have employees that won't last long, and so it's a constant battle to have to train employees, and it's not something you do just once. You need to maintain like swine units. Like I've been on one in Minnesota where they have 3,200 sows, and the employees, they have like a monthly meeting to review biosecurity, to look at things that may work, not work, things that employees may have noticed, and so the management is getting them over all together, and they pay them for a full hour to have a lunch on a Friday. They bring pizza and drinks, that kind of stuff, and they talk, and so that's the kind of stuff too that may be helpful. That's for sure.
What about technology? Can technology help in making us more compliant?
There's some technologies that, well, simple things. For example, you have the outside door, and then you have a door inside to have access, let's say, to the showers. Well, you could have that door staying locked as long as the other one is not closed and that there hasn't been a change of air, right? I've seen that where it takes a minute and a half, 2 minutes to change the air when you open the door before you can open to proceed further. Well, it's automatic, it stays locked until you get like a green light and you can open. So that's a technology that's forcing you to wait, and that's usually when people will sign in, stuff like that. As far as signing in, for example, now we can do it using technology, so you don't have to, because very often people will write their name and stuff like that. You cannot read it, right? It's unreadable. So now you can have an app and you can enter the information, and if that's not entered fully, then the door won't open. So that kind of stuff already exists in some places, and we're thinking of other technologies that would provide kind of what do we say, an idiot proof technology, where if you don't do exactly what's needed, then you cannot proceed. But it's highly technical, and the big issue is that each farm is often different, may have a different layout of the anteroom, and so to find something that works on most farms is quite difficult. So at the end of the day, yes, technology can help, but we're still back having to think about the people who are at the center and who actually need to do things on a repeated basis. So that's a challenge. That's for sure.
So you mentioned before we started the recording that you were working on a technology that currently is stalled. Like, are you able to talk a little bit about what that was and why it's stalled?
Sure. So we use the technologies available in hospitals where if you like when you get in the anteroom, you need to change boots, and they put like microchips in the boot of the that is on in the building, that stays with the building, that should not cross the line. And they have like Purell dispenser, like hydroalcoholic gel to decontaminate your hands. And we had this technology where if you go through and you do not activate the Purell dispenser, you'll get a real-time alarm that will sound and say, hey, it doesn't seem that you actually decontaminated your hands. And if you're not using the boots from the farm to get through, there again, you get a real-time alarm telling you missed something. And that is being recorded, okay, so that you can go back and look at basically also who may have done that repeatedly or not. And if it's used in a positive way, that can be extremely useful, because when we did this proof of concept, we could show, for example, we had like 7 employees. We had one who was not complying as well as the other ones. And so we could identify this person. And the idea was not to blame or to penalize. The idea was to say, hey, we have that information. We want you to do better. Let's work on this. So that's a positive way of doing it. And so when we try to move that technology in different farms with different layouts, then we hit a snag. We sometimes the boots are on the right side, but there's an alarm anyway, and so we have to figure out how come basically the antenna detecting the movement made the wrong call. So we're working on this. It's a lot more complex than we first assumed, because when we did that first trial, it worked out pretty nicely. I guess we were lucky with the farm that we had picked. But once we tried to move it around, we thought, oh boy, that's the principles are fairly easy. It should work, but we need more engineer time to make it work. But if we could get there, we could show, for example, that the alarm, people often respond to the alarm. They're going to say, oh yeah, that's true, I didn't contaminate my hands. So they would go and press the the alcoholic other alcoholic gel dispenser and decontaminate their hands. So that's the kind of technology we hope we can have in place and test it on many swine farms. And because if you do this well, if you have like a Danish entrance with 3 zones, and you do all the steps correctly, that's very very powerful risk reduction measures that you have there. But the problem is that often it's not done.
And so that kind of gets us back to the human behavior part. So, what would you say are some of the factors or measures that we should prioritize when it comes to human compliance?
Well, things are there's a lot of factors, human factors. Personality will play a role. There's emotional intelligence, how people relate to one another, how they react to being told things and all that. That's a factor. And what psychologists are telling us is the emotional intelligence. The good news is it is something you can work on and improve. Attitude, of course, is another factor. And a lot of it can be done to change somebody's attitude. A biggie is what they call normative belief. Basically, how do you perceive that the other employees or the employer looks at something? Like if a measure is known to the employer and to your coworkers to be like something important to do, then the tendency is to say, oh, I better pay attention because everybody thinks it's important, so it must be important. And then there's what we call perceived control. Do people feel they have the capabilities, the knowledge, the skills? Do they have the material to do things? So that's another big factor. So there's a lot of these factors. They all have a role when it comes to leadership, when it comes to communication, training, auditing, looking at incentives, because there's several factors that can be looked at, but they all interact, and that's what's problematic. People are looking for the silver bullet, And in this case, it doesn't exist. There's several things to look at, sometimes at the same time. And I can give you a few examples if you want me to.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Like, well, first of all, you have these factors, and we need to connect them to what we call human desires. Okay. We have all human beings, whether they're from, Burkina Faso in Africa or Western Canada. Humans are humans. They all have the same 8 desires: a desire for activity, ownership, power, affiliation, competence, achievement, meaning, and recognition. Okay. So what the industrial psychologists are telling us is, well, you want to modify somebody's behavior, improve to make it match what you want. Well, first of all, on a big swine farm, you need to select your best leader, and not necessarily your best worker to be like the lead in bringing the other ones to do things. So you need to identify who's got leadership capabilities within the employees. That's one thing. The other one is you need to involve the employees in the decision process. You may have a biosecurity plan, but it's worth looking at it, checking it, on a bi-monthly basis to look at, is there things we could do better? If employees contribute to the input for the biosecurity measures, well, then they get some ownership out of that. You can one big thing that psychologists are telling us that we fail to do that in swine and poultry is to measure individual employee performance and compare them. And they're saying, look, a lot of companies that need employees to really do things systematically the same way, they pay a lot of attention to that. And they find ways to have and to be capable to determine how an individual performs, and they provide a comparison for that individual to the other employees, for example. And it could be a problem if you're using it to penalize, but they say in companies that have success, what they do is that, well, they do audits, right? They monitor and they go to an employee and say, look, here's your performance. This is where you fit compared to everybody else. Congratulations, or you should be able to do better. And why don't we work on that? And there are ways to do that. And one big thing that's neglected is incentives. Because incentives, well, that plays on the desire of recognition, getting training so that you have to feel like the desire of competence, and all these things. If you package it properly, if you offer low cost incentives, sometimes it's not money very often, like unless you offer a lot of money. Usually a pat on the back, being told that you're doing great, telling people, well, look, it's hot, it's warm, it's difficult today. If you guys do everything correctly, we're going to quit 15, 20 minutes sooner. I've got a drink for you guys. Or on Friday, we're going to have a pizza lunch, things like that. But we need to be satisfied with how you are actually performing. So things like that needs to be there. A big problem we see in swine and poultry is the goals that are being set. On the farm is one thing, but sometimes like people who have to go and clean buildings, they're being asked to do that very quickly, and they often do not have time to do everything they should do. Or the companies that are the teams responsible to get the animals to the slaughter plant, sometimes they are put in a situation where it's virtually impossible to respect all the biosecurity measures that are being required. So this lack of, I would say, realistic goals can be a big problem as well. So there's several things there that we can look all more or less at the same time, and we can create an environment where through coaching, training, incentives, reminders, and all this, we can improve compliance.
But you pointed out an interesting fact, which is that labor is often scarce, right? And we have a lot of like turnover. So like, as you mentioned, like maybe employees are put in a position where they just don't have the time to do everything properly. So how can we deal with that? Because we cannot just find another person off the street and to help out, because like, they're just not there.
Yeah, that's the biggest challenge. It's not like, for example, we could show that there's some people who have a personality that make them much more prone to comply to biosecurity measures. And when I talk about this to growers, they'll say, you know what, we cannot afford to test for people's personality and say we'll pick the best. We just take whoever is willing to do the job. And as you said, sometimes we don't even have enough people to do the job. But at one point, we cannot make miracles here. If it's not doable, what research has shown, and that's been published, I think the title was Catch 22. There was it was in the title. They were showing that if you place employees under conditions that they cannot really perform everything you want them to perform, they're going to find a way around it to get the essential done. And they're actually going to be pretty proud of themselves, even if at the end of the day, they really, in a way, misbehaved. They did not do what they were supposed to do, let's say in terms of biosecurity, but they did, in the amount of time they were given, they did clean everything. Maybe not the best way, but they did that. Or they picked up the animals to be sent to slaughter, So, management needs to be aware of that. And this is where communication comes in, because once you're aware of that, then you work with the employees to say, well, do you have solutions, to propose? Is there ways? Sometimes an employee who is actually doing that stuff will say, well, have you thought of providing us with this type of equipment, for example, or with easier access to what we need, shoes, boots that are easier to put on, and stuff like that. It would be so much easier for us, things like that, So there's all the little details, but it's the employees who are actually doing the work that are in the best position to go and say, well, look, what you're asking is not doable. This is why. But then, they may provide, and we need to listen to that. That's often where it's not happening.
And so I guess like that gets me to another question, which is the costs around biosecurity, because like a lot of the things we're talking about, technology, training, everything costs money. So can you talk a little bit about that aspect?
Yeah, well, the biggest problem that we have in swine and poultry is the fact that people look at biosecurity as a cost, and not as an investment. Okay. So I remember being in British Columbia when in 2004, when they had this big influenza outbreak there. They had to kill millions of birds. And I was talking to a duck producer, and we were recommending some biosecurity measures: decontamination of the vehicle, changing boots, washing hands, having coveralls, the usual stuff. And he said, look, he says, I calculated all of this, okay, in terms of investment to start with, to be set up for it, and then the recurring costs. And this is 4.5% of my cost of production. And he says, if I do all this, my neighbor does not do that, and we both don't get a disease, I'm pricing myself out of the market because my, the margin is so thin. If my neighbor, my competitor, would be forced to do that as well, that's a different thing. But that's not the case right now. So that's a big issue. We're looking at biosecurity measures that we know work. We've had research showing that when it's not in place, you're much more likely to have like swine diseases like porcine pleuropneumonia, PRRS, even African swine fever. There's a lot of research going on, not only in Africa, but in Europe on this disease right now. And we can show the classic biosecurity measures reduces the risk. Okay? So, when you look at the cost of doing these things systematically, it can be perceived as very expensive if you're never going to get a disease in years. But is that really reality out there? I think we need to adjust according to where we are at. For example, if you're in a zone with several grow finish operations and you are a farrowing unit, and within a kilometer you've got like 4 farms with 2,000 pigs being produced for market. I think you need to have very good biosecurity and possibly air filtration as well, to fight off all the diseases. If you're in a place with a lot less infection pressure, where you're pretty much on your own, there's not another farm 5 kilometers around, well, of course you can be a little bit more relaxed. So every farm has a set of risk factors, and we need to identify that and say in a cost benefit analysis, well, to put that in place, going like with shower in, shower out and all that, there's a lot of cost involved in this. But if it can prevent, just one major outbreak, what is the value, the cost of an outbreak of PRRS, circovirus, what's the cost of that? So you need to factor that in and make your decision, because of course, I'm not a decision maker here. I'm kind of a consultant, but it's the people who have the money invested who are the ones having to make this decision. But I would argue that if you're going to bother having an anteroom or having showers, having the boots and the equipment and having all of that, you may as well do your best to make it workable and to make it actually useful, because you have that space. You have your zones. It's all there. You may have been forced to do it, like in poultry in Canada. They need to have at least 2 zones in the entry room and all that kind of stuff. So and they're being audited on it, and so fine. Well, you have to have that. Why don't you try to make it work? Because again, we have plenty of evidence that when it's in place and it's well done, it works great. For example, there was a study a long time ago in Quebec that showed that if you have shower in, shower out facilities in a farrowing unit, you're 7.3 times less likely to get PRRS.
That's huge. Okay.
Yeah, well, that's something, so that's the thing. I have a list that I've given sometimes to growers to think about. At the end of talks on biosecurity, I always tell them, well, I understand that each farm has a different setup, as I said, a different set of risk factors and circumstances that may require to do more or less. But I say basically know your risks. Make sure you understand what are your actual risks or where you are. Uh, know what needs to be done and how it has to be done, so that you can train people. But then again, you need to reach the right people. I've seen often in poultry, employers like the growers are being trained, and we assume that the growers are going to train their employees. But that's not always happening on some farms. And sometimes you have a language barrier. We have people who speak Spanish, and I've been on a farm one day where the grower asked me, "Can you help? I want my employees to know something." But and we try to communicate with some apps and all that, but it's not as good as if we could have better, communication. A big deal is to keep things simple and easy to do. Sometimes we have a setup that makes it very hard to do what's needed. And when it's hard, we don't like it. We try to get around it. And so if you have the space, you have the equipment, let's say the shoes or the boots to put to go where the pigs are, it's something that's easy to put on, to remove. Well, when it's easy, it's encouraging to use it, because sometimes it's not. I've been on a farm where I felt that the boots were like for equestrians, like people who go on horses, they have these
Yes.
boots that are so tight.
Yes.
You get discouraged. You say,
I'm a horse rider myself. I know what those boots are like. They're not easy to get into.
that's it. Just leading by example. I was asked in the United States to do a kind of an audit. It was a company that they had a big feed mill, but they also owned farms, and they had a shower at the feed mill that people had to take before going to the farms. And on some farms, they actually had also showers. And as I was auditing them, some employees told me, said, "Do you realize, that the manager does not take a shower, and or the VP production does not take a shower when it goes on the farm?" And so I asked them, says, "I was told you don't take a shower. How come you don't take a shower?" And they said, "Well, we know where we've been, and very often we come directly from home, so there's no need for us to do that." But, I had to tell them, I tell you what, your employees, they notice how you behave. And one employee told me, he said, "I'm not dirtier than these guys." He actually used an expression I cannot repeat here. Um, but you see, I mean, people may not realize, but these employees, they pay attention to that. Providing feedback, like in hospitals, it's been shown when we had COVID, we realized, although we've known that for decades, that we have a compliance issue in hospitals. Washing hands, for example, is terrible. And so what they've done is they put themselves in a position where they had individuals checking out if people were washing hands or not. And so you get a real feedback in real time. And that has a tremendous impact on compliance. I mentioned the incentives. Having small incentives, there's a lot of stuff, recognitions that don't have to be expensive. People will appreciate being recognized. I mentioned making the design easy. So it's easy to put things on. It's easy to wash your hands. For example, catchers in Quebec are from Guatemala, many of them. And they were telling me, well, we're willing to wash our hands, but in winter in Quebec, if your water is just cold water, it's like it's way too cold, it hurts, we're not going to do it. So it's not obvious to bring hot water to a barn. But if you can have that, if people know they'll have warm water in winter in particular, they're much more likely to wash their hands because it's pleasant. It's not something that will hurt. That's how that's the expression they gave me. You know, doing training simulations, stuff like that can be good. Now, getting the buy-in from the employees. I've been on this farm where the management had picked up 4 or 5 issues that they had noticed in the month, and they brought that up to the employee lunch, and they asked them, do you have any suggestions how we can fix that? And that brings buy-in. If you come up with the idea to improve a situation, it's kind of hard to neglect it because you came up with it. So that's a big thing to think about. The problem, of course, is constant. You need to always be doing these things. You cannot just say, "Oh well, we've done a good job. Now we're good for 3-4 months." That's unfortunately not how it works.
It's time for our famous 3.
Your ag business didn't stall on the market. It stalled because everything roots through you. Pricing, hiring, the angry account. You're not leading the company, you're refereeing it. The Owner's Box is a peer group of 8 to 10 agribusiness owners with one agenda: get you out of daily operations and into the owner's seat. Monthly working sessions, real decisions, real commitments. Built by Wisenetics, the #1 podcast network in animal protein. Apply for Cohort 1 at the Owner's Box. Seats close when the room is full.
Yes, it's a constant thing. So, unfortunately, we are running out of time. I would have loved to continue talking, but it's time for our final 3 questions. So the first one is, what your favorite swine-related book or resource?
Well, in pigs, there's the porcine health management. I've got 2. I've got the Journal of Swine Health and Production, okay, that I think is quite applied. But in Europe, they had, like, I would say something's a bit equivalent. It's the Porcine Health Management Journal. I was invited a few years ago to. I think they have that every year. It's a swine health management symposium or congress, European swine health management congress, and so they have basically a journal there that's called Porcine Health Management. I think that's interesting. It's got applied stuff.
Perfect. What about a book or resource outside of agriculture that you like?
I've got, that's really outside. Okay. It's about fluid, electrolyte, and acid-based disorders in small animal practice.
Okay.
In poultry, we've started using blood biochemistry for diagnostics. And we're discovering a lot of stuff. We're discovering sometimes that, we can detect earlier than before some imbalances, some acidosis, alkalosis in the pH of the blood, all that may be related to colibacillosis, for example. You fix that, you fix the blood pH, and all of a sudden, the E. coli doesn't seem to cause problems in birds. So why not in swine? Right now, a few people are starting to look at biochemistry in pigs, and they seem to be discovering interesting things. So, but to look at that, we don't have publications yet in swine or poultry. So you need to go really out of the box, like small animal medicine. I cannot believe I'm telling you this, because when I did my DVM, biochemistry, I thought was quite boring. I knew I would get in swine or poultry, and I figured I'll never need this stuff. But a few decades later, I'm there promoting that. So you should always be careful what you think. When you're young, you don't have experience. You think you know, and no. That's it. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And then the last question is, in your opinion, what sets successful swine professionals apart from those that are not?
Well, of course, it goes back to the ability to communicate. A successful swine person, so whether it's a veterinarian or a manager, is someone capable of connecting with individuals and getting them to actually follow recommendations. Having a sense, this is where this emotional intelligence comes in. The industrial psychologist, that I was tested, and it turns out I'm really not brilliant. And that's when they told me, well, in terms of emotional intelligence, I still have a long way to go. But they said, good news, you can improve, and I've been improving. And my dean is very happy about this. I'm a little bit less likely to overreact to things, because I've been working on that. So individuals who work on their emotional intelligence, they get to improve their communication skills with the people they have to deal with as part of their team or our clients. These are the people who are going to have the greatest success. I don't know if we have time, but I'll give you this great example. I was in my last year in vet school in small animal clinic, and I really I had this dog that came in. It was an attack dog. It was a Doberman. Okay, and I really was scared by this thing, and I didn't know what the problem was, what the issue was with the animal, but I was very interested in the animal and what the trainer who brought it in, how he did the training, all these things. And I asked the questions. I was the one asking questions. The guy was there for a consultation, but I kept asking questions. And eventually the clinician came in because I was just a senior student. And anyway, came up with what the issue was, and we eventually took care of it. Later on in the day, he came to me, the clinician, and said, because I knew that my clinical rotation was not going that great, and I was afraid of failing, And he came to me, he said, you know what this client told me? And I was so scared of what he was saying. He said that you were the best intern that he had seen in years at the vet school. I'm like, intern? I'm not an intern. He says, I know. It's crazy, right? He says, he just loved you. You interacted with him. He was so happy to see that you were interested in his dog, in him, in what he's doing. He says, you have no idea how satisfied this guy was. And you could get him to do whatever you want, I'm sure, So I thought, wow. This is amazing. I was not a good small animal clinician as a senior student then, but I had managed to connect with that person. And this experienced clinician told me, you could have got him to do whatever you want. He was on board with you. You had managed to connect we don't see often. And I managed to pass my rotation and graduate and moved away from small animal. But it's just to say, those things are important, how to communicate, and we can improve. That's the good news.
Perfect. Well, that's a great point to end the conversation on. So thank you so much for joining me on the Swine in Canada podcast show today.
Welcome. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So that concludes another episode. So don't forget to subscribe to the podcast to stay updated on future episodes. So thanks everyone for listening, and until next time.